last 3 decades, the popularity and recreational value of whitetail deer has exploded throughout the United States. It is every big game hunter's Alaska, British Columbia, and Africa wrapped into one plentiful, easily accessible species. He is every sportsman's champion. However, the picture has not always been so rosy. 60 years ago, the whitetail population in North America had been greatly depleted because of intense market hunting starting in the earliest colonial times. In 1890, the U.S. Bureau of Biological Survey estimated that approximately 300,000 whitetail deer remained in the U.S. Their recovery has been nothing short of phenomenal. White-tailed deer have been studied and managed intensely during the last 30 years by professional wildlife managers, probably more so than any other species in the world. The whitetail's recovery rests squarely on the shoulders of the sportsman conservationists who were and are willing to bear the costs of such studies and research. The present population of white-tailed deer in the U.S. is near 14 million animals. By far, the most important single factor in the whitetail's success story is the adaptability of the animal itself. It is one of the few large mammals that has adjusted to and even thrived despite habitat changes brought on by man. Its ability to survive and prosper in close proximity to man is legend and a key factor in its survivability. Let's pause here a moment and tell you what this video isn't. It's not about how to field dress deer, select the best rifle, or another collection of ho-hum deer hunting stories. These subjects have been covered extensively by outdoor writers. We intend to give you a good serving of the meat and potatoes of whitetail deer hunting as presented by some of the nation's top whitetail hunters, including 2 of the most prominent, Gene Wensel and Dick Idle. They will present honest, accurate information and recommendations about the art of whitetail deer hunting. They work at their craft 12 months a year in and year out. All of our hunting sequences were filmed in Montana, but the principles demonstrated are universal and can be applied to deer hunting anywhere. Gene Wensel, who lives in Montana's Bitterroot Valley, is an avid bow hunter and dedicated student of big whitetail bucks. His best buck, a 12x12 non-typical, scored a whopping 197 3/8 Pope and Young points. Gene has a book titled Hunting Rutting Whitetails and conducts numerous whitetail deer hunting seminars throughout the country. Dick Idle, whose home is in the mountains of west central Montana, is by his own admission a whitetail fanatic. He's currently the field research director for the North American Whitetail magazine. Dick has personally harvested numerous trophy whitetail bucks, and his trophy collection contains the largest heads in the world. The mega trophies truly take your breath away and are so exceptional we will show you some of them.
The one that you're holding on your left there is a Minnesota head. It's killed by a guy named Raff. It scores 231 non-typical. It's a very typical non-typical. Like a lot of other heads, it's got a lot of ifs. And one of them is that if it was clean, it didn't have the forks in there, and some of the abnormal little points he's got on it, probably would have been a world record. This next buck here is an Illinois buck that was run over by a car in 1970. And he is, again, a very impressive buck. He's not built to score well. He's 31 inches wide, 30-inch main beams. Antlers weigh 11 pounds. And if the right side was like the left side, he would also be a new world record. This buck here is the number 1 buck from Iowa, scores 282. In the former Boone and Crockett book, it is ranked number 2 in the book behind the Benson buck from Texas. One interesting thing about this deer is that it's got a big major tine broken right here. And if he had not broken that tine, it matches this one here. Had he not broke that, he would easily have been a new world record for all those years. The buck on the right there is killed by a guy named Carroll Johnson, also from Iowa. Again, a very typical, non-typical. Got a tremendous typical portion to his rack. He's got long abnormal points, which really runs his score up there. He's 256 and some 8s. But not super wide, but very tall and very impressive. But all in all, they're 4 pretty impressive bucks, all right.
Well, there she is, Scott.
Oh, yeah.
That's a nice big adult doe.
Yeah.
Excellent.
What constitutes a trophy? It's in the mind of the hunter, as it should be. A trophy in Dick or Jean's eyes is one thing, while in the mind of a young boy or girl on their first deer hunt, it's another.
Well, you should be pretty proud, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
The Boone and Crockett Club, which records the antler scores of rifle-killed deer, has set the scores of 170 points for a typical buck and 195 points for a non-typical buck as the minimums necessary to be entered in the record book. Presently, the largest typical buck scores 206 1/8 Boone and Crockett points and was killed in Wisconsin in 1914. The Pope and Young Club, which represent archers, has set a minimum score of 125 points for a typical buck and 150 points for a non-typical buck. Any score greater than these earns a place in the club's record book. Taking a mature, wise whitetail buck is no easy task. Trophy-class bucks are invariably old animals and have to be a cut above the other bucks. In fact, Gene Wensel hunts these big bucks as a totally different species, which operate under a completely different set of rules. It makes the entire game very interesting. Remember, elk hunting requires physical stamina. Whitetail deer hunting requires mental alertness, plain old hunting smarts, and real perseverance. Let's discuss some physical characteristics of deer and how they can be applied to the hunting situation. Our discussion will be limited to three areas: the deer's external glandular structure and function, their senses, and antler growth. There are four external glands of interest to the hunter. First, the preorbital glands, located in the inside corners of the eyes. They serve to mark rubs and to imprint the buck's scent on leaves and twigs above the scrape. The interdigital glands between the hooves. The odor from these glands are highly individualistic and enable deer to track and identify each other sight unseen. The tarsal glands are located in the inner surface of each hock. This is the most important gland in the breeding buck's arsenal and appears as dark patches of hair. This gland, during the rut, emits a very strong, pungent odor, which can be detected by alert hunters, and which may serve to intimidate other bucks and performs other social functions such as attracting does. Its full function is not understood. The unpaired forehead gland is located in the skin of the forehead. By rubbing a sapling with his forehead and antlers, the buck imprints his personal scent on the tree and identifies his physiologic condition to other bucks and does in the area. In summary, deer have a number of highly developed, superbly functional scent glands which enable deer to have a complex communication ability. Understanding the function of these scents enables the smart hunter to predict deer movements. One other important source of communication among deer is urine. Urine odor will attract a whitetail buck to does in heat. Upon approaching estrus, the doe urinate often, which alerts the buck to her receptiveness. The buck will smell the urine and assume a head-back, lip-curling posture as he interprets the urine odor. Buck urine and his scrape have important significance to the hunter. A dominant breeding buck will frequently urinate into his scrapes, which then serve as signposts to alert other deer of both sexes as to his dominance and breeding condition. It is believed by biologists that does will visit a urine-scented scrape and in turn leave their own urine. Subsequently, a buck finding the urine scent of a doe at his scrape is then able to determine her state of receptiveness and will track her by the individualized scent of the interdigital gland. In other words, a buck's scrape serves as a bait, so to speak, for a doe approaching estrus. One important point to remember is that for the scrape urine phenomenon to work, the area must have a high buck-to-doe ratio, and the area must hold a good population of large, mature, breeding bucks. If this is the case, a fresh scrape would be an ideal location for a tree stand. Eyesight plays an important part in a deer's ability to interpret its environment, but not so important as its nose or ears. The whitetail depends strongly on motion to locate and catalog an object. Walking in our hurried, quick, human style will quickly alert a deer. However, provided the wind is favorable, most often fail to identify the hunter as danger, provided the hunter is absolutely motionless. This is true even if the deer is staring directly at the hunter. Almost invariably, the sportsman is foiled by a deer's sense of smell or hearing. Nothing occurring in a whitetail's home range goes undetected. It knows every rock, tree, trail, scent pattern, and type of noise. A deer's ears are as large and sensitive as radar. They are constantly working, ever alert. Since white-tailed deer often live in close proximity to man, they can be unbothered by traffic noises, farm machinery, barking dogs. But one unusual or out-of-rhythm sound, someone talking, footsteps, a deer is instantly alert. By far, the deer's most powerful sense is that of smell. With its nose, the deer interprets and makes judgments on everything in its environment. Odors never lie. A deer's eyes will often fail him, and sometimes his ears, but never his nose. There is only one thing that can bring human scent to a deer, and that is a human being. There is no other smell like it in the deer's natural world. A deer's nose is never turned off. The process of breathing to maintain life brings a flow of information to be analyzed and acted upon. Therefore, the hunter must be constantly aware of wind strength and direction. There is yet one more whitetail characteristic that must be mastered if deer are to be successfully hunted. This characteristic is very important as a communicating media among deer. The observant sportsman can use this habit of deer to gain an edge. It is called body language. Through body language, deer show contentment, dominance, fear, excitement, and breeding status by changing position of the limbs, ears, head, and body. Body language is a whitetail's way of showing reaction to what is going on in their environment. Understanding these body positions enable a hunter to anticipate what a deer is feeling at a given time, and perhaps even what its next move will be. Remember, deer read other deer's body language. A hunter may see a deer which, through its body language, may alert others as yet unseen by the hunter and blow the whole stock. The size of a buck's antlers are dependent on three things: nutritional intake and quality, genetics, and the age of the deer. A major reason why many whitetail areas in the U.S. produce poor quality racks is because the average age of harvested deer is 2.5 years. They are just babies, not having matured in body size or antler development. This is why there are so many big, heavy-racked whitetail bucks in the northern Rockies. They simply are not hunted with intense pressure. Antlers reflect the vigor and health of the buck and serve as visual indicators of such to their peers and to the does. A buck with a large, heavy rack will be near the top of the social scale. Bucks usually shed their antlers by late January and begin to grow a new rack by May. We would like to introduce you to Paul Brunner, who manages his Montana ranch to produce huge whitetail bucks.
What we're going to do here today is try and show you a little something about whitetail antler growth and genetics and feed in their relationship to antler growth. And while I'm talking here, I'm going to lapse into hunter's jargon. I'll talk about these as horns instead of antlers. First head I want to show you is a head of a whitetail buck fawn. This fawn was shot when it was about 7 months old. One of the common misconceptions that I've run into when talking to whitetail hunters is that a whitetail buck fawn in its first fall will have small horns or antlers. This is absolutely untrue. What they have in the first fall is a horn pedicle, and that's all it is. And sometime, usually in December or January, they begin to break through the hide on top of the head. But they do not, under any circumstances in the first fall, have any kind of antler growth at all. This is the jawbone from this 7 or 8 month old buck fawn. And he's got milk teeth, and at this point only has 4 teeth. When we move on to the next head, This is what we refer to on managing our deer as a scumbag buck. This particular whitetail buck is 18 months old. We know that because we've aged him with his jawbone, and he's got 18-month-old teeth, and we use a jawbone aging board to help us determine this. This buck is extremely poor quality, and because the feed in our area is exceptionally good, high protein, we have to believe that genetically this buck was inferior. He's got extremely small diameter pedicles, very, very short horns. In fact, I saw this buck several times before I realized it was a buck. This is a classic example of what happens to a very poor spike if he's allowed to live. This is a 2.5-year-old buck, and he was very carefully aged, so we know for sure that's what he was. This buck was undoubtedly very much like this buck when he was 18 months old. My opinion on this thing is he'd probably never be anything but a spike. Real inferior quality deer. The next buck here never should have been shot. This buck is an 18-month-old buck. We aged him carefully again. He's got very good diameter on his horn pedicles. He's got good mass on his horns. He's a good, heavy forked horn. This buck, probably allowed to grow to 6.5, 7.5 years old, would have made Boone and Crockett. And I can say that because our area produces so many large bucks.
White-tailed deer are often thought to be browsers, but in reality, they consume a variety of food types, including grasses, fruits, forbs, mushrooms, woody shrubs, tree parts, and various agricultural crops. Deer have the ability to select the types of plant food which are most nutritious. This choice of prime food enabled deer to survive under difficult conditions. However, food preference during hard times is influenced by availability. For a long time, it was believed that white-tailed deer had a very small 1 square mile home range. It is now known that a rutting buck will stray as far as 8 to 10 miles from his home range. He does this mostly after dark, takes no unnecessary chances, and returns home quickly. His home range is where he spends the majority of his life. The area will be 1 square mile or less and contains life's necessities, water, food, and adequate security cover. Within this home range is the so-called core area where the buck will spend the majority of the daylight hours. During the night, the rest of the home range is used as a feeding and socializing area. By using such a small home range area, the whitetail gains a major survival advantage over the more widely ranging mule deer. He can become more intimately familiar with every aspect of his range. Anything out of place is immediately recognized. Since a buck's behavioral characteristics change drastically during the rut, it is an opportune time to hunt him. It is the period during which a buck's behavior is modified to its greatest extent by breeding activities, and during which time a hunter will have the most success taking advantage of the deer's weakness. In the northern latitudes, the peak of the rut takes place during the last 18 to 22 days of November. It is during this period that even the older, mature bucks will make mistakes, giving the sportsman the upper hand. There are 2 types of visual signposts that a breeding buck creates before and during the rutting period. These are the scrape and the rub, both of which must be thoroughly understood if the hunter is to plan a hunt with some purpose. Dick Idle will review with us the meaning of scrapes and rubs.
Here's some more up here. Yeah, I heard some stuff broke down.
Yeah.
I would suspect there'd probably be a scrape there. Yeah, sure enough, you can see a spring scrape. Yep.
Hey, look at the marks up here on this one too.
Yep.
He's rubbed it
Sure
high right
has.
there with the tine mark.
Yeah, now they push, sometimes they push these kind of trees over and they bend them down sometimes, so you could see he could push that right on down.
Yeah.
So I don't pay a lot of attention on these size as to height because he
Okay.
can bend them
Bend those
down.
down,
But
yeah.
when you get the big ones that he can't push over, then that's telling you something. Like that big one right over there, you see it
yeah.
leaning there.
Yeah.
He's not going to bend the tree like that. But this here,
Dick, he snapped this one off. Look at that.
yeah, he sure did.
There's the end of it.
Yeah, this one, and here's another one. One of these 2 probably belong on there. You can
Yeah.
see that maybe both of them might have been a fork there or something. I pay a lot of attention to especially straight twigs snapped off,
Yeah.
because I think it has a lot to do with tine length. Bucks with short tines very seldom break stuff off. It's real interesting, Ed, to when you find these kind of things, because I feel like, especially on a straight one like this here, you know, where you don't have forks, for a buck to break that, normally you take a buck that's just got normal straight small tines and all, he'll push on it and he'll twist it, but if he's got normal spacing on it between his points on his beam, he's going to have a hard time breaking that. And every time I found a lot of this, there's been a real exceptionally long tine buck in the area. And what happens when he's in here rubbing, he gets these things in between these points here, and when he twists his head, he can snap them off. But on short tines, that thing will slip out between the tines, and he won't break them. But that's interesting on this scrape right here. This is a very typical spring scrape, and the way to find them a lot is from this. 90% of all your scrapes are at the front of it. The preorbital gland that's right in the front of the eye on a deer, he likes to work his horns over a scrape, and he likes to rub that preorbital gland on something, and it leaves a waxy secretion on there that identifies that as being his own particular scent. And I think it's a little bit of territory marking, although bucks are not territorial. The significance of scrapes is that it shows you that there's bucks in the area.
Okay.
I put less emphasis on locating a particular set of sheds from scrapes than I do from rubs, because bucks start making rubs where they live. They have a certain area they live in year-round. And as he travels in that area, in that travel pattern, he makes these rubs. Scrapes only come into play for about 30 to 45 days as it gets real close to the time that the does are coming into estrus. And you can see, already we see a lot of good rubs in here. And I pay a lot of attention to rub densities. And we ought to just, so people understand what a rub density is, we probably ought to start counting some of these, so you can actually see how many's in a specific area. But
Sounds good.
okay, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4 right over there.
Here's one right here, Dick, in front of us.
5, 6. This is really a large one right here. Probably can't. He rubbed this side up real good. There's good height on it also.
This rub here is the biggest one we've seen of any of them. Does that make a difference size-wise of the tree they rub?
I think it makes a great deal of difference. Now, you'll see a lot of rubs like on some of these that they're inch in diameter, 1.5 inches. That's definitely a good size rub. Probably, what would you say, about a 4-inch diameter, 5?
Yeah, at
On
least.
the tree.
At least.
And you can see gouge marks all up in here where his tips of the tines have skinned it up real good. You can see from even years past. And you'll generally find that traditional areas where bucks have a high concentration of use will be used year after year and forever. Getting back to our rub densities, now we ended up where we have 6, and you can see 2 on that tree.
Yeah.
There's 8.
There's 3 right there in a group right over there.
Yeah, we got about 8, 9, 10. We got 10 rubs, and there's another one over there. We got about 11 rubs right here in a 30-yard diameter area, and that would be classed, what I would class as a rub concentration. Now here's a tremendous
Oh, man.
rub here, boy.
Wow.
Big bucks in this country. Look back there. This is really interesting. You can see all these gouge marks back here, all the way down into here. You can see where he's dubbed this off, even down here.
Dick, these look like these were made unintentionally. What is this little
Well,
combination mean?
the significance of this is you can see he's not going to push that tree very much at all. That's a rigid, stiff tree. And a buck that does this, it shows he's got a good size rack on him. Now, generally, I found it means that he often has long tines, or at least one long tine on the side that does that. A normal buck, by the time you brought his beam around here and brought his antlers out here, if he didn't have some long tines and a rack on him, he just wouldn't be doing that. It's not, again, like a lot of other things about this, every one of them is not 100% conclusive, but after you see enough, you start to get patterns, and pretty soon, you know, it becomes very apparent. You can see it's got the ideal conditions here. You've got a meadow and thick cover all around the border. You got evergreens, and you got security, you got feed, you got everything right here. They really prefer these fringe areas right here. As you've already seen, what walking we've done so far here, you can see all these rubs and scrapes all the way around the perimeter of this thing.
Right.
And you'll notice that most of them are just inside, right on the edge and inside. They don't tend to use the clumps out in the open so much as they do to remain near the cover. They don't, big bucks, just by the nature of the animal, don't like to expose themselves more than they have to.
They're pretty nocturnal too, Dick, aren't they? These big bucks.
Not so much in this country, but generally speaking, very much so. Most places, especially where there's hunting pressure, but where it's very intense. But here, you don't get a lot of hunting pressure per square mile, and consequently, you get a pretty good movement during the day. But and you'll find a trail running just inside this thing, inside the timber line there, about 20 to 30 yards, and it'd be treated much the same as a field, agricultural field in a populated area, where your fringe trails will stay inside. The bucks like to stay inside just far enough that they can see out, but something outside cannot see them inside. This here, you can get a little idea right here from this viewpoint of what happens on these travel patterns, these trail patterns, this network of trails. And it's very important to understand that regardless of where you hunt or whether it's agriculture country or not, to understand that these trails all link little core areas together. They link breeding areas, they link feeding areas, bedding. All these things are linked together. And anywhere that I've ever been, including the mountains or even any place that has low hills, deer prefer to bed on knobs and ridges as opposed to the flat. Getting back to this travel trail network, what I would expect to see here is, you can see this perimeter down here. You'll have your trail just inside. You'll have lots of trails down there going in all kinds of directions. And where the cover joins other cover, you're going to find heavy trails going in and out of there on each end of this thing, and wherever joins other cover.
Through this end area here, Dick,
right,
where the swamp cover is continuous with the south-facing cover.
Mm-hmm.
And then
right
the same
there
on this end over here.
Right. And what you're going to see there is when this trail comes out and starts up these side hills like this, you're going to have vertical trails. And they'll go up pretty much vertical till they get to some of the benches up in here, and you'll start finding good bedding areas. And the way you'll generally tell is when they get up there, then they'll turn horizontal. Most of the trails will follow benches, and when you get to those horizontal trails, that marks bedding areas. And it's very obvious in this country, and even in country like in Canada and places where I've hunted that have low hills in there, you'll have the same thing, except there you'll have the bedding areas right on the tops of them and just off of the downwind side. In other words, if you've got a mountain running like this and a wind coming over it like this, bucks prefer to lay on the back side of it so they can see down below them what they can't smell, and they're smelling anything that comes up, approaches from the other side.
There are certain record-class bucks that will score over 170 Boone and Crockett points and which will never show themselves for any reason, doe in heat or not. They are hyper-cautious and super reclusive. And that may be why each of us keeps the fire in our gut burning. Maybe one cold November day we'll catch him in a compromised situation. Because whitetail deer are so popular and so widely hunted, there have been many more hunting theories, styles, and techniques presented discussing whitetail hunting than just about any other subject in the outdoors. Whitetail hunters live in nearly every geographic location in the U.S. and come from all sorts of economic, ethnic, and social backgrounds. How are whitetail hunted? What common denominators are there? We are now going to show you, under authentic hunting situations, the 4 best techniques to take whitetail deer. These are deer drives, horn rattling, still hunting, tree stand hunting. Drive hunting must involve a minimum of 2 hunters and up to as many as 6. The idea is simply to have the drivers walk through an area known to hold deer and attempt to push the spooked deer past one or more hunters, strategically placed overlooking the expected exit routes of the driven deer. The hunters on stand are placed at vantage points overlooking as much country as possible, but within shooting distance of main travel routes or expected escape routes. This hunter, looking for a trophy, allows this small buck to pass. The driver, emerging from the brush, ends the hunt. Deer can appear suddenly and unexpectedly, sometimes so shaking the hunter he misses. And sometimes the deer are passed over. Antler rattling as a hunting method has come into vogue in recent times. Rattling may be defined as a mimicry of 2 bucks fighting with the thought of luring a 3rd buck into shooting range. Gene Wensel will discuss the techniques with us.
Gene, I've heard a lot about rattling whitetail, but I've never had anybody demonstrate how to do it, or what to do, or what type of horns or anything. Can you give us a little bit of information?
You bet, Gary. Rattling it's getting to be the big thing. It's getting to be a very popular hunting technique, and unfortunately there's a lot about it that a lot of guys don't understand, and simply because it's been around for years, but just in the past several years is it being utilized in any great extent, and there's a lot of guys doing it wrong, and there's a lot of guys seemingly think they have to do it a certain way. They're making it a whole lot more complex than it actually needs to be. Essentially, rattling is calling, and it's no different than calling elk, calling coyotes, calling ducks. It's a calling technique. Sometimes it's going to work, and sometimes it's not going to work. Under the right conditions, done right, in the right time of year, it works like a charm. And it's just like going out with a varmint call. You might make 6 calls and not have any response, and then on the 7th time you might have 2 or 3 different coyotes come in. If the situation is right and the conditions are right, done right, it'll work every time. Okay, anyways, basically there's numerous factors or several factors that you have to take into consideration when you are rattling. First of all, the buck-to-doe ratio is very important. And this is probably more important than anything. You have to have competition among mature bucks. You cannot expect to rattle. I sell rattle antlers to people all the time, and I sell them in states where I really, I'll get letters from guys that say, I tried rattling, but it didn't work for me or whatever, in other words. And in an area where there's no competition among mature bucks, it's not going to work. Essentially, it's just everybody likes to fight, I ask myself, why did this buck come in and so forth. That's another very important factor as far as deer responding to rattling and so forth. Whitetails are a moody animal, and there again, I'm a fisherman, and I equate a lot of this to fishing, but if they're a moody animal, and you can put like a trout, you can put a fly over top of a trout one day, and he'll completely ignore it, and you can put that same fly, same size, same pattern, over top of the same trout the very next day under the same weather conditions, same time of day, and he'll smash it, and they just, depend upon the mood they're in. The first initial clash there, again, I've never timed it. I usually do the first sequence probably 45 seconds to a minute. If I had to time it, it'd be somewhere in there, 45 seconds to a minute. Okay, now, then I usually wait about a minute, okay? Then I do another sequence, not quite as loud, but still plenty loud, and I do that about the same, about 45 seconds to a minute. But that time, what you want the deer to do is to get a line on you. Now, usually if they haven't showed up after the second sequence, I'll wait about 4 or 5 minutes, and I'll take it for granted that the deer is in the area and just hasn't pinpointed me quite yet. Then I'll do a third sequence, and I'll do that one much quieter than I do the second or the first sequence. I'm taking it for granted the deer is very close, and he can hear quite well, and I want him to entice them and yet not give them away my exact position. Anyway, bang them together like that, initial clap, then and you go on.
That for about 45
You
seconds.
go on for that for about 45 seconds, something like that. Now, here again. Now, if I'm on the ground, which ideally, like I say, if you're on the ground, I do it on my knees. You're constantly, I'm constantly in dry leaves. This isn't very noisy because it's damp out here today, and it's fairly. But the whole time, in other words, you're rattling like this. You can run up and down trees like this, stomp the ground, kick your feet behind you like this the whole time, and you can't actually make too much noise and so forth. Pull them apart and just picture two bucks fighting. At the same time, I'll go do one of them. You can make some vocal sounds like they're out. It's not really. They're out of breath, and they're fired up, and it's just they're steam and so forth coming out there. And it just anyway. You want to make it as aggressive and as action orientated as you can the first time.
Still hunting is hunting in the purest form. It is a solo sport, and, in a way, still hunting done well is an expression of an individual's personality and his appreciation of a total outdoor experience. Very few people are expert at it. Done properly, still hunting takes extreme discipline, self-control, and mental skill to interpret what is going on around us. White-tailed deer are probably the most difficult big game species in the world to still hunt. But taking a mature buck this way is a very rewarding experience. Still hunting may be defined as a method of hunting by which the hunter attempts to move through an area as quietly and unobtrusively as possible while maintaining a razor's edge of alertness in order to spot game before he himself is detected. The accomplished still hunter will suffer many frustrations practicing his trade. These failures must be accepted as a learning experience. A still hunter isn't a person who wanders heavy-footed at random through the woods without a feel for the environment around him, hoping for a snapshot at a white flag. This sportsman was skilled enough still hunter to collect his buck despite the forest floor being covered with dry, crackly leaves. He used his eyes and brain to read the sign and thus overcome the buck's superior ears and nose. One must have the utmost confidence that deer are in the area to be hunted. This raises our confidence levels so that the levels of concentration necessary to still hunt successfully are there. Familiarity with the terrain and deer movement patterns are also critical. Moving slowly is another key. Depending on conditions, moving quietly ahead for 2 minutes and standing looking for 10 to 12 minutes may be necessary. One should move ahead only when every particle of real estate has been examined within visual limits. Remember to look for parts of deer, a throat patch or piece of antler. It isn't often that an entire animal will be seen. Still hunting done properly is exhausting work, both physically and mentally. It's a good feeling to get so emotionally wrapped up in trying to find a buck first. Gene Wensel once commented, "After finishing a session of still hunting, I feel like a limp noodle completely drained. It's a good feeling because I know I've hunted right." Tree stand hunting is the most effective way to harvest white-tailed deer, particularly the bigger, craftier bucks. Why is this so? One reason is white-tailed deer, if not unduly disturbed, are predictable, using the same bedding, feeding, and travel lanes day after day. Therefore, a stand can be set up after studying the situation, and the deer can be caught making his rounds. Second, it is the only way to hunt white-tailed deer and somewhat neutralize their acute sense of hearing, smell, and sight. If those three areas can be regulated or controlled, the hunter has a tremendous advantage. Finally, a tree stand affords a good view. Being above the brush gives the hunter a terrific advantage. A good line of sight can be had for 360 degrees and extending out some distance, depending on ground cover. Gene will now review some of the finer points of tree stand hunting.
Okay, Gary, when you do place a tree stand, you get the platform exactly where you want. You want to keep in mind game movement patterns. You want to keep in mind your shot opportunities. You want to keep in mind that try and place, if possible, an ideal situation is where you have the wind going with you. In other words, you're playing the wind as far as game movement, and also if you can keep knowing where the game should be, if you can keep the sun behind you, it's a big advantage. You know, if they have to look into the sun, it blinds them, so forth. You know, so anytime most of the time you actually can't take advantage of everything, but wind comes first, game movement patterns and so forth come first. But if you can ideally put it in, utilize the sun placement, you know, let's say on an evening stand. Now, certain stands I place for morning hunting, other stands I place for evening hunting. That's another thing. I don't like to hunt the same tree stand 2 nights in a row. In other words, it's 2 evenings, let's say. The deer will develop a pattern of you going, if you go to the same tree stand in and out the same way 2 and 3 nights in a row, by the 3rd night or even the 2nd night, they're inclined to get a pattern on you, in other words. So I would rather have alternatives where I'm hunting this stand tonight and another stand a mile or a half mile away some other, tomorrow night, and then come back to this stand day after tomorrow and so forth. My tree stand height is usually, my platform height from the platform to the ground averages about, I've been getting higher every year, and it's probably 18 feet now. It used to be around 14, 15 feet, and the deer are noticing me more and more. They're getting smarter every year it goes by. They're looking up more and more, and I'm inching up. To be frank with you, I'm a little bit afraid of heights, and the higher a guy can get and still keep in the vital area on a deer, if you're shooting with a bow and arrow straight down, you can't do it. The angle on the vital organs is too steep, in other words, So I usually try, I would say probably 18 to 20 feet is max with a bow and arrow. The advantages of a tree stand, first of all, you're out of their normal line of sight, the level of sight. They will look up, like I said, but normally their eyes will scan ground level. Secondly, your scent is up higher, where your scent usually blows over top of the deer. Okay, now this is a tree. I'm going to kill a buck out of that tree right there, and I'll tell you why. Now again, this is north here. The deer are going to be headed out from the feeding area, headed across this way, and they're going to either swing down through this thick, there's a low spot here, maybe you can't see it, but there's a low spot here, pretty swampy, and there's a heavy trail coming out right here. This tree is ideally located. First of all, you got the sun behind you. Secondly, you got a lot of brush around the tree for back cover. You don't want to set up a tree stand where a run goes straight. In other words, a straightaway run is not a good place to put up a tree stand. Ideally, you want to put up the tree stand on a curve or just inside of a curve in a run, in a deer run.
Let's accompany Gene on an early morning hunt in Montana's Bitterroot Valley. Gene had thoroughly scouted the area. He knew the deer would gather in a stand of cottonwoods before crossing the river to feed in an alfalfa field. His stand is placed so the deer would cross beneath it. Gene remains motionless as the herd emerges from the river. He draws his bow when the buck drops his head. After hitting the buck, Gene waited for an hour before beginning to track him. Unfortunately, as is often the case in the mountains, a sudden snowstorm swept in and made tracking a difficult challenge. Through diligence and careful work, Gene was able to collect his trophy.
All right.
Normally much more of an open
In the second situation, Paul Brunner harvests a spike buck to eliminate this inferior animal from his herd.
really super good whitetail British.
Paul has placed his stand about 18 feet up a large ponderosa pine overlooking an area commonly used as a feeding site by the spike. Paul patiently waits as the spike moves in. Even though the spike looks up, it fails to recognize Paul as danger. Paul draws.
Good hit. There's blood right here and hair. Well, we got a good blood trail here. He's really spraying it out. The arrow went completely through him, broke off. He'll leave a good blood trail. Well, it looks like he's down. He's done for. A little spike and his one horn is broken off. There's just a tiny little piece of it right left.
A great psychological advantage is enjoyed by the tree stand sitter because he knows he has a good chance of seeing a deer first and can prepare to shoot while the unaware deer is still at a distance. However, a slight variation of the tree stand is a ground stand. In this situation, the hunter chooses a vantage point at ground level where he suspects a deer will pass or come to feed. Wind strength and direction is much more critical here than in a tree stand. For several evenings, Rob Hazelwood has watched two good bucks follow a group of does to feed in an alfalfa field. His plan is to place himself at a vantage point before the deer leave the willow cover to feed. His shot will be about 250 yards. More and more does filter into the field, accompanied by a single buck. Finally, a dominant buck comes in and scatters the does as he checks their state of estrus. Rob, from his resting position, takes careful aim at the largest buck. The buck is hit. And separates himself from the others as he bolts for cover. Rob finds the buck less than 50 yards into the willows.
This is a real good example of a mature 5-point whitetail buck. He's fairly even. He's got a little bit of deduction on this side here. The main beam isn't quite as long, and as you can see, the last tine here is a little bit longer than this tine, so he'd lose a little. He's also got a very interesting tine down here that would actually be a deduction tine. About 70% of the score when you're scoring whitetails is scored from your actual points here and the length of them. About 17% is scored from the mass of the antlers, and about 12% is scored from the inside spread. Now this buck here will probably score right around 150. When you do score a whitetail or any animal, you draw an imaginary line from right about this point here using the main beam as your guide. You take your tape and measure from that imaginary line and go right up to the top. This point right here will go right about 8 inches. This point here will go just about 10 inches. Your brow tines probably will be about 6 inches. Actually, they're 5.5. And your inside spread on this buck is going to go about 17.5 inches.
The previous hunting scene was filmed on a ranch in central Montana that Rob manages for big buck production. He will share some thoughts with us about that.
There's really 3 things that we're real concerned about when managing for trophy whitetails. Number 1 is age of our animals. Number 2 is the genetics. And number 3 is nutrition. Nutrition is probably the most important thing we're looking at right now. In these northern latitudes like this, nutrition is very important to get our bucks and does to overwinter in good shape, and so they have good antler development the next year. Genetics is probably the least important of all of the 3 things I mentioned. However, we do game cropping through legal harvest by harvesting does, and also some of our smaller bucks, our older bucks that may not look like they'll make much anyway. We'll go ahead and allow the harvest of them. Ultimately, we're after the big whitetails that will score 140 Boone and Crockett points and up. Well, there she is, Scott.
Oh, yeah.
That's a nice big adult doe.
Yeah,
Excellent.
look, there's where I hit her.
Yeah, you made a very good shot right there.
Right in the chest there.
Good going. Congratulations.
All right, thanks.
Now let's-
Harvesting does is an important element in Rob's management program.
Okay, yeah, here she is back in here.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good. There she is. She dead for sure. Looks like
Yeah. Yeah,
she's not breathing. Her eye isn't moving.
no, she's a nice big doe.
Yeah, good one. About how old do you think she is, Rob? How
I
do
don't
you
know. Let's have a look here. The way you age these things, Gary, is looking at their lower jaw
Yeah.
and checking out the tooth wear and the amount of staining.
What teeth?
That's exactly right.
She didn't have hardly any left.
This doe hardly has any teeth. Her teeth are just worn down. She's a real old doe. I'd say maybe 9 or 10 years old.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. You notice here she's non-lactating. She didn't have a fawn with her, and there's a dry doe essentially, and she's pretty much served her purpose. And really, right now, it would just be competing against the younger deer coming up. And so this is a good one to harvest. You made a nice shot.
Good. Thanks.
Good deal.
No matter where you hunt, being able to interpret what you see is the backbone of successful whitetail deer hunting. It takes a commitment of time and practice, but will eventually bring success. Gene Wensel presents an interesting theory about successful whitetail hunting. He said that to be the consummate whitetail deer hunter, we must begin to think and act like a predator. We must fine-tune our senses, such as eyes, ears, and smell. And most importantly, we must learn everything we can about how our prey behaves and use our superior intellect to outsmart him. Good hunting. In the high country of the Mountain West, the advent of Indian paintbrush and other signs of spring signal a resumption of the ongoing processes of life in a land only recently locked in winter.
In this video, Rob Hazelwood of Helena, Montana, and Steve Music of Judith River Ranches at Hilger, Montana, will demonstrate the proper technique of field dressing and caping big game animals.
This trail right here is a real good one, but I think the main trail where the bucks are going to come out is right through here